quick reminder, The Law of Attraction Simplified is free today on Kindle if you're watching this video when it came out. The Kindle version is free today on Kindle of The Law of Attraction Simplified. The link is below in the description. And we're going to have a free group coaching session April 11th. If you want to join us, you can email me for more information, info@radicalcounselor.com. April 11th, 4 p.m. Eastern. Let's jump right into it. I said a week or two ago that I was not feeling very inspired to do YouTube videos, and that's changed. Now I'm back to doing them almost every day. It's funny how inspiration works, isn't it? That is today's topic. Now, today's topic is how we get inspired and what motivates our creativity, what motivates us changing how we feel, and motivates us doing what needs to be done to make changes in our lives, including manifest better things in our life that we want. It's not going to always be right out of the textbook. What we're going to be discussing, what we are discussing, is what we always discuss and what we were directly talking about yesterday, which is that we got to think out of the box, and we can't be afraid to move both physically and psychologically when things aren't going our way, when we feel stuck. When we feel stuck, it's really important to think out of the box and to recognize that some of the tools you've used before probably can help you, but they might not help you in the same way, and that maybe you are going to want to do things differently than you've ever done before. And you have stuff that you can probably rely on to help you achieve what you want. But what you're going to rely on is going to perhaps show you something different than it did before to help you. I was thinking about all this in regards to just like creativity, because this is a creative process, right? Especially when we're talking about like manifesting principles, these core concepts of the law of assumption, law of attraction, or whatever we want to call it. When we get past the dogmatic lingo, it's about changing how we feel on the inside. And that is a creative process, right? The inner alchemy of doing that, right? Of changing how you feel. One thing I've always found valuable is, reading about the creative process in some way. And, I'm a creative person, but we're all creative people, right? Something that's very popular that a lot of people like to do is like read books about like artists, how they create stuff. I feel like a popular subgenre the last decade or so has been like books talking about like creating art. I feel like one of the big books that started this was from years ago was I think it's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I believe I have that right, or Julie Cameron. The Artist's Way, famous book about creating art, about the creative process. And, some recent examples of this, like Rick Rubin, right? He's got a new book out, like about creativity, basically, how to be creative. This is like a big thing now. And people talk about being creative, not just from an artistic standpoint, but being artistically creative, or being creative from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, or from like a side hustle standpoint, or from so many different angles of like what creativity means. It's a big thing. And the book I always come back to for this, like another book that comes to the top of my head, not the book that I come back to, like another big book about like creativity that I liked was like this David Lynch book, Catching the Big Fish, I think it's called, something like that. David Lynch, the filmmaker. But anyway, that's an aside. The book I always come back to that really helps me think about the creative process. One of the best books, if not my favorite book ever about the artistic process, is Bob Dylan's memoir, Chronicles, which some of you probably have heard of and have read. It's from like the early 2000s he wrote it. This book is a masterpiece, okay? And you don't necessarily have to be a huge Bob Dylan fan to appreciate it. I think like a book like that, a book like that comes out and people want to hear about Bob Dylan's life. And if you're looking to find out about little, personal factoids of Bob Dylan's life, he doesn't really reveal that often anywhere, including in that book. But what Bob Dylan does in Chronicles and elsewhere too, if you read interviews with him, he's not guarded at all when it comes to explaining the creative process. There are few books in any genre I've ever read that explain the creative process better than Chronicles. Bob Dylan in general will help you in terms of being creative more than just about anybody. His music is obviously is all about that. It just oozes with creativity and with wisdom. But this book specifically, Chronicles, I'm rereading it right now. This is probably like the 5th time I've read it. I don't read books that many times, usually, unless they're great. Like, I don't read memoirs multiple times, for instance. And every time I've read this book, I've gleaned new things, new approaches, ways of looking at parts of my life differently from reading this book, particularly related to being creative. Bob Dylan was a master manifester, is a master manifester at manifesting things. Creativity is almost synonymous with manifesting. And what's really interesting about this book, Chronicles, is that he bops all over the place in terms of the stories he tells. It's not like in linear order. Like he's talking about when he first came to New York, he was like 20 years old, he was very young. He was trying to break into the music industry. Then he talks, about being at like the peak of his fame in the late 60s. The Bob Dylan that people think of, probably the most is that Bob Dylan from the 1960s. End of the 60s, he basically intentionally tried to subvert his career because he didn't like what it was doing to him personally. Then he talks about later about being like basically at the end of the rope and planning on retiring in the 1980s and having this wave of unexpected creativity that basically transformed his musical career for like the last 30 or so years since. But he talks about these different times in his life and how he, I guess you could say, navigated the creative process. And the point of me recording this video is to tell you that it's wicked out of the box. What you would expect to do, what you would expect him to do, is not at all what he did. The solutions he came up with were not the solutions that necessarily worked for him before. And stuff that you might have learned years ago will all of a sudden resonate with you sometimes. And you pick up on different things at different times. This is like real creative manifesting advice. It's not like, mental dieting or kill the old man or stay in the 4D, don't worry about the 3D. All these dogmatic terms we hear. No, it's like, how do I capture and feel in touch, in unison with that creative energy inside of me right now? And there's so many ways to do that. Artists are really good at exploring that. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that. And specifically, something that really resonated with me when I rereading this book this past week or so. He talks to Archibald MacLeish. MacLeish, I think is his name, famous poet from the 20th century. He was going to do some songs for a play that MacLeish had written in like 1970. And they're talking about different poets, and MacLeish says, like he was asking him if he had ever read Socrates, and Dylan said, no, I really never, read him that much, or Dante. And Archibald MacLeish says to him, he said, the thing to remember about them was that you always come out where you went in. You always come out where you went in. That's really, that line, every time I read that, it seems to deepen for me. So many of these different spiritual and manifesting ideas, specifically manifesting ideas and concepts, we think they're going to change us in this dynamically different way. And a lot of the time, at least, if not always, we end up coming out where we went in. We learned something, we got the information we needed that helped us change positively. But we come out where we went in the best sense of the word. We haven't changed. Our deeper self hasn't changed. I find that very comforting. Anyway, I hope this video doesn't seem too random for you. It's not random at all, in my opinion. But we all look at things differently. If you have questions or are interested in talking about this stuff, radicalcounselor.com. Until next time.